All right, here we go.
Wait, go back one?
Can you go back one?
What's Drupal?
Oh, no. Oh, you did. You know, I knew
Well,
it.
you didn't even blink.
As I was running down the hallway, I'm like, shit, I'm leaving my computer open with a Herschel in the room. Like, what am I going to find tomorrow? That's what I'm more worried about. So glad that was on the recording.
That's
Fantastic.
actually, we waited until you pressed the right button.
All right, yeah, okay. This is me.
He left.
I believe this is the link to the slides, if you want the slides later on. So bit.ly max-composer. Let me get the captions back on. All right, so real quick, I'm just going to go through, I'm going to make the case for why we need to use Composer. I'm going to talk pretty fast here. Just yell at me if you want me to slow down. But let's just take the very simple example, forget about Drupal or Drupal for a few minutes, and let's just talk about a generic PHP application. Let's say the application has to do a couple things. It has to send like a fancy HTML email with an attachment, and maybe it has to read and write some YAML. So you could write both those from scratch, right? You could use basic PHP functions and do all that stuff using PHP functions, but we live in an open source world, and luckily there's a ton of open source components or libraries or PHP classes or dependencies or packages, whatever noun you want to use there, that can help you do it. So there's a Swift mailer class that is basically a wrapper around a lot of PHP functions that allows you to easily send fancy emails. The same thing with the YAML component. This is a Symfony component that just makes it real easy to read and write YAML from like a PHP object or something like that, or a PHP array. So the problem starts coming in the fact that your project is on its own timelines. And your project's timeline is going to be completely different than Swift mailer and YAML component, and the maintainers of those components don't care about your timeline, and nor should they. So you could be in the middle of development of your project, and maybe there's a new 6.0 version of Swift mailer. And if you've already started your project and you're writing to the Swift mailer 5.4 API, and suddenly it's 6.0, your stuff suddenly breaks. So it would be nice if there was some way that you could codify or programmatically lock your project to use a specific version or maybe a specific range of versions of your dependencies. And if you only have one or two dependencies, you could probably, as humans, we could probably manage that without too much heartache. But the problem gets deeper because a lot of these components have dependencies of their own. So maybe you're only using two components, but those components in turn have dependencies, and their dependencies have dependencies, and all of these versions and timelines are all living independently, so things can very quickly get complicated. So I talked about all these, I'm sorry. So when you build your project, works with a particular version, no guarantee that APIs aren't going to break. It'd be nice if you could lock. And not just mentally, not just know, oh, I know that my project only works with this version, but make it so it's difficult and codified for someone to accidentally put a new version in your code base. And then there's also the case of what happens if you have two dependencies who want different versions of a subdependency. You kind of need to know that. You need to be able to handle that. And again, if you only have a small handful of dependencies, you can probably spot that, on your own. If you got a lot of dependencies, that gets really hard to spot, and and especially if they're buried as subdependencies. So I like saying this sentence because I use the word dependency 4 times, or variation. So it's possible that a dependency of one of your project's dependencies can conflict with the dependency of another one of your project's dependencies. And just this sentence alone, I would stop this part of the presentation after this sentence, because this sentence just sounds confusing and sounds like we need a tool to fix that part of it. But it's typical for modern projects like Drupal 8 to have a lot of dependencies. Drupal 8 has a lot of dependencies. So let me slow down a little bit as I reach my conclusion here. Keeping all of your dependencies versions locked so that you don't break APIs, as well as checking for version conflicts, can be difficult and tedious. Especially because a code base can have a lot of dependencies, where each of those dependencies has a dependency, and further on down the rabbit hole. Someone a lot of us know, Ryan Drama from Commerce Guys, when he talks about this in Composer, he basically says humans are not dependable. We do not want to be the dependency manager. We want to have a tool to do that. And that's what Composer is for. Composer is the tool that solves that problem for us, so we don't have to deal with all of this craziness. So, I basically, I like to introduce Composer every time I talk about Composer with that, because even to this day, I'll still hear people who are developing for Drupal and moving to Drupal 8 going, oh, I have to learn Composer. Why do I have to learn Composer? That's why we have to learn Composer. There's huge advantages to being able to include all of this non-Drupal code in our code base. But with those advantages, we have some work to do. We have to learn this new tool. So if you're using Composer, you probably know some basic commands. So Composer list basically gets you a list of all the Composer commands. Oops. Composer list. So it's a fairly significant command set there. I haven't counted, maybe 30 different commands. But for the most part, for us to do the 80% of our job with Composer, we need require, update, remove, and install. Right? That's like probably the 80% of what we do with Composer. Maybe there's self-update, maybe you're using Composer validate, but most of the time, you're requiring, you're updating, you're removing, and you're installing. You can almost, remove the third one and have require, update, and install be your 80%. So the meat of this presentation is about the new Composer template. So let me talk. It's called Drupal/Recommended Project. It's part of Drupal core. It's actually been committed as of 8.8 in the Drupal core repository. So this is kind of a big deal. But let's go back in time a little bit and talk about how we got here. So since about the time Drupal 8.0 was released, which I thought this, every time I look at this, I think this is a typo. We've had Drupal 8 for 4 years, which to me it feels like, half that. But ever since Drupal 8 was released, for the most part, if you were going to use a Composer-based workflow, you use the Drupal Composer Drupal Project. And this is something that's on GitHub. So let me just put it up there so we can all see it. So this is not like an official Drupal community project, although a lot of community members work on it. But up until Drupal 8.8, this was kind of the de facto best practice for managing your Drupal 8 code base. But I think it was DrupalCamp or DrupalCon a little over, maybe a year ago? No, maybe even 2 years ago. A bunch of folks got together and said, let's refactor this and bring it into core. So the result of that was the recommended project. So when Drupal 8.8 was released, which was almost exactly 4 years later, it wasn't brought directly in. It was heavily refactored. It was lightened up a little bit, but some parts and pieces were given test coverage as they should, and quite a bit more functionality. And it is now included in Drupal 8.8 as Drupal/recommended project, Composer template. So if you're starting a new Drupal project today, you should no longer be using this. You should be using the recommended project template. And this is what we're going to focus on today. So far, so good? So let me open this up. Because I'm going to refer to that a few times. So what are the differences? For the most part, the recommended project actually has less stuff in it. Where the Drupal Project Composer template included Drush and Drupal console and some other helper things like that, recommended project is more lean. It basically includes Drupal core. It includes a scaffolding plugin, which is incredibly robust. It includes Composer installers, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, because that's really kind of the keys to the kingdom for both the Composer, the Drupal Composer Drupal project, and the new one. And it includes kind of a more kind of a user-friendly project message plugin that kind of outputs some helpful information after you install Drupal. The biggest difference, I mean, the scaffolding plugin is a pretty big difference. It's a lot better now. For me, and I think a lot of people who use the old template day in and day out, the biggest difference is that the new recommended project template by default has pinned dependencies, meaning the dependencies that you get with Drupal 8.8, regardless of when you run, when you install your project, are the versions of the dependencies that were shipped with Drupal 8.8, which means it's the version of the dependencies that were tested with Drupal 8.8. With the older one, by default, you do not get pinned dependencies. And there were a couple times in the past few years where remember one time there was a twig dependency. There was a release kind of outside the Drupal release cycle, because that's the way things happen. And it was a minor release of a twig dependency that broke Drupal. So people that were using this template, when they, if you started up a new site or you did just a kind of a bare Composer update, suddenly you were getting the white screen of death. Because those dependencies were allowed to float, and they got ahead of what was shipped with Drupal, and therefore what was tested with Drupal. So this idea of pinned dependencies has kind of been a thorn in our sides for people who, there was a workaround to use pinned dependencies in this one, but it wasn't the default. So a lot of folks did not have that. So I'll actually show that to you in a few minutes. All right, so consider it a best practice. Use it. In my opinion, if you're starting a new site today, use it. If you have an older site that's using the old template, you're still fine. There's nothing wrong with the old template. It's not as lean, and as long as you kind of know what you're doing, I would switch over to pinned dependencies. But the old template is going to be maintained for the foreseeable future. So there's no reason to change. You can, but kind of decide on your own. It provides a robust starting point. It gives you a nested doc route. It gives you the ability to customize your scaffolding files, which we'll talk about. And best of all, it's now officially supported by the community. So where in the past, and I don't think it ever happened, where the old template could have fallen behind core. Maybe there was like a new release and the core template ended up, and the old template didn't catch up for a few days. Now that it's part of core, it will remain in sync with core moving forward. All right. So a couple things about this recommended project template. So Drupal core is a dependency of your project, meaning your project is a project, and usually the first dependency, if you're making a Drupal project, is Drupal core. What's interesting is you're not actually requiring Drupal/core. You're requiring this Drupal/core recommended. And I'd like to show this one. So if we go to github.com/Drupal/core recommended, this is what's called a meta package. Let me make sure I can get on the right branch. Sorry. Branch. Oh my gosh, I gotta go smaller to see it. There we go. All right, so if we're on the 8.8 branch, and we look at the composer.json. So this dependency, the Drupal core recommended, does not have any code of its own. Basically, it's just a composer.json that has a bunch of requirements. And the requirements are pinned at specific versions. So this is the thing that makes sure your dependencies aren't going to float ahead of what was shipped with your version of Drupal. So this, in my opinion, is one of like the flagship features of this. Yeah.
So it's actually pinning 8.8 dev, not 8.1?
Well, it's going to give you the latest release version. So any version of 8.8, 0, 1, 2, 3 is going to give you these pin dependencies. Yeah, I don't know why they didn't just do like caret or tilde 880. I'm not sure why they have the dev. It could be because this was actually here. Actually, I bet you the reason is that this was developed before 8.8 came out. So in order to test it, it had to be --dev. That would be my guess, and it was just never sent back. So that's a big one. That's the docker that I talked about. Scaffolding files. So Drupal. Again, I'm just going to level set everybody here for a second, just to make sure we're all on the same page. If I go to a Drupal 8 site, so scaffolding files are basically, so here's my web directory, so this is Drupal 8. Scaffolding files are basically all the files that aren't, core. So all of your hidden files, your autoloader, robots.txt, index.php, upgrade, web config, these are scaffolding files that are not included as part of Drupal core. When you get the Drupal core dependency, the only thing you really get is what's in the core directory. So somehow our composer template has to provide these other files, and there's actually some of these as well on the project root. So in the older template, there was a script. It was basically maybe a PHP script that every time you did a composer install of the old template, it actually called up to Drupal.org and said, may I have the index.php for Drupal 8.6, and it would download it. May I have the update.php for Drupal 8.6, and it would download it. So there's a lot of downloading going on. With Drupal 8.8, inside of the core repository, there's now an assets folder that has all the scaffolding files. So the new scaffolding tool doesn't do a network operation. It basically just does a copy. It basically, I think, we could probably, I'm pretty sure I'm up to date here. Yeah, they're buried in here. Assets vendor, and they are, well, I might be wrong about where they are, but there's an assets directory. I don't think this is it. So the new scaffolding plugin, no more network access. It basically just copies your scaffolding files to the right place. And we'll talk more about the scaffolding plugin in a few minutes. It uses composer installers to install Drupal-specific dependencies in the right place. Because by default, when you do a composer require and some dependency, you have to put it in the vendor directory. When we composer require path auto, we want that to go in the module/contrib directory. So that's what composer installers does, and that's flexible and configurable. And then, of course, it adds the entry for Drupal's packages repository. Oops, I'll keep on doing that. So let's just take a quick look at the recommended project template. We're actually going to use it in a few minutes. So I like to, when I look at composer.json files, I break them up into 3 sections. So the first one is kind of like the metadata. So not a whole lot that's too interesting here, just metadata about the project. This is our repository entry, because by default, when you do a composer require, it's going to look at packages. It's not going to look anywhere else unless you tell it to. So by having this entry, if it doesn't find the Drupal/paragraphs dependency on packages, which it won't, it will go and look at the Drupal packages there. So all of the Drupal modules, all of your Drupal themes, everything on contrib is automatically available through this. So we have to have this in order to get Drupal modules and stuff. The next section is, I'll put it up the top, but I'll point. The required dev section, this is basically like the manifest. But, as you can see, this is a lot simpler if you're familiar with the old template. This new template only has 4 entries. Here's the Drupal core recommended I just showed you. Composer installers. This is the thing that says put Drupal modules here, put Drupal themes there. Core Composer scaffold. This is where a lot of the work to get the stuff into core went with this scaffolding plugin. We'll talk about this later. And core project message, which just outputs some helpful information to you after you install it. And then all of the core development stuff, the hack testing, debugging stuff, is part of required dev, where it should be. And then the last section is really data that helps plugins and kind of the behavior of when you run Composer commands. So back in the old days, there used to be a Drupal dependency, which was Drupal core, but it didn't last too long because it wasn't well architected. And if you try to use this, it'll break stuff. So we put it in the conflict section. So Composer will not allow you to add that as a dependency. Some minimum stability, prefer stable, sort packages, all kind of vanilla Composer stuff. And the extra section of your Composer.json file is basically parameters that get passed into your various plugins, Composer plugins. So this first one is for our scaffolding plugin. And this basically just sets the location of the web root to web. So by default, when you install, when you use this template, you're going to end up with a directory called web, which is basically your doc root. But everything's configurable. If you want to call it my directory doc root, you change it here. If you want to call it HTML, you change it there. If you want to call it Fred, you change it there. And then web root becomes a bit of a variable that you can use other places. Installer paths. This is where we get to define all the Composer installer stuff. So if you Composer require a dependency that is of type Drupal module, and this is basically a key in the modules Composer.json, it will end up here. Web/module/contrib/ the name of the module. So if you want to customize where you put your modules, if you want to customize where you put your themes or drush commands, you can do that all here. You don't have to change very much. You just kind of update that there. And then the last section is the Drupal core project message. And this is basically like, yeah, you can install Drupal. Here are some links. To be honest, most of the time, I remove this plugin completely.
It even says to do it at the bottom.
Yeah, remove it. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. But I can see use for this. I don't necessarily think it should be a Drupal core plugin. I think it should be more generic. There's probably other generic ones. But I could see a use case where if you're in a large organization where you want to customize this template for use in your organization, and maybe at the end of it you output a message where for documentation I'm using this template, go here. To file an issue about this template, go here. So I can see use cases for it, but if you're just building a site for a client or one site for yourself, I don't really see the use case for it. Going in the wrong place. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fire this up. So I'm going to use ddev here. So just give me a second. So one of the gotchas, one of the gotchas with using Composer is you always have to be aware of what version of PHP you're using on the command line. I have my machine set up in a way that if I wasn't aware of it, it would be problematic. And I leave it this way because I teach this class a lot, and I want to demonstrate it. So here's, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let me move this up. So on my command line, on my Mac command line, I'm using PHP version 7.1. All right? So if I run a Composer command, Composer blah, 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 whatever, Composer's PHP application, it's running in PHP 7.1. Composer dependencies can include a dependency not only on other dependencies, but also on the version of PHP that you're using. So if your production environment or your remote environments are running PHP 7.2 and you're running PHP 7.1, that can be very problematic. Because if you try to install a dependency that needs PHP 7.2 or better, and I'll give you an example because I teach with this example. You see I really like the YAML component. The latest version of the Symfony YAML component requires PHP 7.2.5. So if right now, if I do a composer require of Symfony YAML, I can't get the latest version. I actually have to go all the way down to the 4.x branch. Even though my remote environments are running PHP 7.2. So I think it's vitally important that the environment you're running your composer commands matches at least the minor version of PHP. Right? So everyone kind of needs to be synced up. If your remote environments are running PHP 7.3, then all of your developers better be running PHP 7.3 as well. How do I get around this? Oh, not version. I need a dot there. Sorry, typing too fast. The version of PHP inside of my DDEV container is 7.2. So if I need 7.3, it's as easy as changing one character in a DDEV config file. So as a general rule, if you use a Lando, DDEV, Doxel, or VM, something like that, just make sure that when you run composer commands, you're running them inside of that machine. Because it's really easy for me right here to do the demo I'm about to do and do composer, create project, blah, 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 Drupal recommended template. But composer is going to be running in a 7.1 environment, when in reality, I'm going to be posting on 7.2 or 7.3. So that's one of the gotchas I see happen all the time. So in this case, I'm going to do a DDEV composer create Drupal /recommended project, no interaction. And I'll also do a no. It's a little bit different than what I planned, but I'm going to do a no install as well. Although I don't know if that's going to work. I should test it, but oh well. So just enter the DDEV composer create command is the exact same thing as a composer create project command. It's just that DDEV has to do a little extra stuff because when you do composer create project, the directory has to be completely empty, and I can't have that because I have my DDEV configuration. I have a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem. So by using the DDEV composer create command, DDEV does a little shell game with directories in order to do everything. Yeah, so I think that worked. Okay, so clear ls-al. Yeah, okay, so I got my pico composer.json. And honestly, this is the way I would really do things. I would do a no install because I'd want to come here and change this. I'm going to make this, FLDC/demo. And then I change the description, maybe I change the license, maybe I add, some authors, I'd make it mine. Composer validate. This will probably not validate anymore because I just changed the name. So the name is part of the content hash. So this will tell you that things are not up to date. This is a good way of just, if you start making changes in your composer.json, this will kind of give you a little reminder of what you need to do. But let's just do a composer install.
Do you have composers?
Yes. You saw I was already backspacing. All right, so I got time here, so I'll say it. Composer install basically takes the contents of your .json and your .lock file and basically builds out your dependencies. And then after it's done doing that, if there's any any scripts that the plugins are running, or maybe sometimes before that, it allows the plugins to do their things. So you can see we're getting all the pin dependencies. I do this a lot, so everything's coming from cache. So we're not doing anything over the internet yet. We may do a little bit up top to get latest versions and stuff. But we got Drupal core coming in now. So one other nice feature about this stuff in core that's new with Drupal 8.8 that we have for the first time now is if you download the tarball from Drupal.org, kind of the old school way, right? If you download the tarball, extract it, and start working on that, you can still download modules, from Drupal.org, extract them, put them in the right place, whatever, everything will be fine. If you decide tomorrow that you want to start using Composer, Drupal 8.8, the tarball is ready for you to do that. You can immediately go in and say Composer required. The only caveat is, once you make that decision, it's a one-way street. Don't start mixing and matching. Once you start using Composer, use Composer. All right, so let's go up and so there's core, and there's core recommended, so that got all of our dependencies and Drupal core. It's Saturday afternoon, my voice is almost gone. It's a little earlier than normal. Composer dependencies can suggest other dependencies, so that's all this is. Generating the autoload files. And now here comes the scaffolding plugin coming. So now the scaffolding plugin, again, rather than it being a network action, rather than phoning home to Drupal.org, it's basically copying, to, the project root. I told you that there was, this web root variable we saw earlier. Now it's actually being used by this plugin. So this file is being copied to the project root from asset scaffold files editor config. And was I looking in the right place? No, I'm curious. Core assets vendor. No, I wasn't. This might not even be an 8.8 site. That could be the whole problem. Where's the one I just made? Web core. I'll zoom in if. Yeah, core. It wasn't 8.8. Yeah. So all those files are being. So this is where they live. They come in core this way, and they get copied over. So because they're being copied over, the way this plugin was written, it gives us a chance to get involved in that process. So I'm going to do a demo in a couple minutes where, you really need, where's the regular README? Is it lower? There's the sites README. There's another README somewhere. Yeah, the module README. There we go, right here. This one right here. I know that's the contrast is horrible there, but right here. So this is basically creating the main readme.txt file, and it's copying it from here. Your site does not need that to operate. In fact, some people would argue that by keeping this included, it makes it a lot easier for sniffers to figure out what version of Drupal you're using and open up to a possible attack vector. So it would make sense if you didn't include this readme.txt file. And the scaffolding plugin allows you to basically say, don't do this. Don't copy from here to here. I don't need a readme. I don't need to install. It allows you to add additional files. So a company like Pantheon or Acquia Cloud that includes their own YAML files, part of their hosting, they can create a plugin to automatically include their hosting files. And it allows you to append to files. So if you want to append stuff to the end of your robots.txt, you can do that all within your composer.json. And it allows you to apply a patch to these files. So it's pretty freaking robust. Whatever you need to do with scaffolding files, it will do for you. And then I actually think it missed. Did we miss some of the? That was weird. It didn't output all of the message. We got part of it. That's weird. But this is part of project message right there. All right, so now, let me just do this, do the config. I'm just going to reconfigure it because it'll see Drupal now. do upstart. Not that we're gonna, we're gonna see the installer screen. That's about it in a second. But let's come back here. What am I doing on time? So at 1, oh man, okay. Where are we? This one. All right, so we'll probably have time. I have till quarter off, right? 10 more minutes? All right, so we're going to have to make some hard decisions. I'm not going to go through this. I feel like before everyone kind of understands require, update, remove. So let's get to the maximize stuff. So I've already talked about this one. I've already talked about be careful when using virtual machines or Docker in your version of PHP. There is actually a key that you can add to your composer.json that specifies what the project version of PHP is. So that, and that actually solves the problem I told you about. If you're using 7.1, but you want Composer to use a different version of PHP for evaluating dependencies, there's actually a key you can put in your composer.json to tell Composer what version you want to use to evaluate. So that's kind of a little bit of a workaround. But always be aware, because it's bitten me, and I see people get bitten by it all the time. This demo, people like seeing this one, but it's actually, it's not so much a Drupal one. It's actually a pretty easy demo. It's a pretty easy thing to do, especially with GitHub. If you have a private GitHub project, like a custom module for your site that you keep in a private repo, it's actually really easy to include it with Composer. You basically just have to add a new repository, of type VCS, and then give it it's basically the SSH path to your private repository. And then when you try and Composer require, in my case, I have a demo one called my private repo. Once you add this, and I do a Composer require ultimate/private repo, Composer will actually prompt me for a GitHub token. And it will give me the URL to go to GitHub, log in, get my token, copy my token, and then paste it into the prompt, and I'm done. It's like ridiculously easy. So it's really a good use case for, maybe you don't want to keep your custom modules inside, your project repository. Maybe you want to put them somewhere else so that you can use them in multiple projects. This is a drop-dead simple way of doing it.
Do you know if the Bitbucket is the same, or is it?
I believe Bitbucket, GitHub, and GitLab are similar, yes. I have not demoed it, so your mileage may vary. But I was honestly just floored by how easy it was. Here's a command I use all the time that I find folks don't often know about. So I'm going to switch over to cd.db8. This is DrupalEasy.com site. And I'm just going to use a straight Composer. So Composer outdated -- direct. This is like the module update page in Drupal on your site, in the UI. This basically shows you dependencies that have updates available. The -- direct basically makes it so it only looks at dependencies that you specifically required. -- direct makes it so you're not looking at dependencies of dependencies. But this is a network operation because it's phoning home to find out what's the latest of each version. I don't think I have any security updates unless something happened in the last 24 hours. So I think I'm safe doing this and it's being recorded. But we'll see that DrupalEasy.com is on 8.8.1. I don't think 8.8.2 is a security update, right? Okay. So we'll see that in a minute. Hopefully less. Anybody use this command? No?
I've never seen the direct one.
Yeah. Direct makes it worthwhile. Otherwise you get too much. Especially with a Drupal site. Alright, I'll swing back in a second. Dry run. Anybody ever use dry run? If you're in the middle of, if you're trying to update core or something and you're nervous about it, just tack dry run to the end of it. Composer will do everything except actually perform the update. It will tell you if there's any conflicts. It will tell you what it's going to download. It's basically a dry run. It's a good thing if you're nervous about whatever you're about to do. tack on dry run. I was actually going to do a demo of the why not command, but that every time I do it, it ends up being like a 30-minute conversation. If you're trying to do an update and Composer is saying no, there's a conflict, the why not command can be a lifesaver. You can do Composer why not followed by the dependency you're trying to update, and it will tell you exactly, because Drupal CCK needs version X of this, but this other dependency requires version X of that, or version Y of that. So it shows you what's blocking you. So it can help. It's helped me get out of a lot of sticky situations. Composer validate I've talked about. This is all pretty basic stuff, but if you need to require an alpha, beta, release candidate, or dev version, you can just tack on the dash or the ampersand are interchangeable. You can use either one. But you can just say, I want to use version 4.0 or 4.star at RC. And that'll get you the latest release candidate. Beware when using dev, we're getting a dev version, because in all other cases, the dependency is just downloaded. When you get a dev version, it's cloned. So that's really only a problem if you are committing dependencies to your project. If you're committing the vendor directory to your project, then you end up with a Git directory inside of your project Git directory, which Git is not cool with. So there's a couple different workarounds to that. I'm not going to get into them now, but just be aware that if you do use dev, you're getting it cloned. Let's see if this is done. Yeah, there we go. So this shows me that I'm using a beta version of contact storage with the 1.0 version. It'll put in green if there's a major version update. So my Google Analytics is a little bit behind. And you can even see like Symphony Finder. So I find that this is helpful to me because this will show me if Drush or Drupal console has an update, which you're not going to get in the UI. Or Composer installers, or the Scaffolding plugin.
So when you're working on a project and you're adding contrib, are you pinning the version numbers, or are you just saying, give me any two versions?
No, I generally, like the default is going to be caret major version .0.
Okay.
And that will basically make it so if you do Composer update, you're never going to go to the next major. I'm pretty comfortable with that default in most cases. When I'm not, then I will go in and do something else. But keep in mind, I built this DrupalEasy.com like probably before Drupal 8 came out. So I'm not. This might be the same version from 4+ years ago. I don't know. I'd have to look. I don't even think I have this module enabled. So that's the other thing. This will show you dependencies that need updated regardless of if the module's enabled or not as well. So, yeah.
What command was that again?
That was outdated direct. Outdated -- direct. All right. Composer patches. You guys aware of this one? How many people use Composer patches? Okay, the rest of you need to be using this. This is so this came with the old template. It's not part of the recommended project template, although it's one of the first ones I add normally. It's not supported. It's not maintained by the Drupal community, but Cameron is a member of the Drupal community. I believe he actually works for the DDEP folks as well. But this allows you, how many people ever have to patch a module or patch core? Yeah, that's everybody. Okay, so if you have to do that, in the old days, you'd have to manually apply that patch, or maybe you had a script to do it. With this dependency, you can actually put a link to the patch file in your composer.json. And Composer will automatically patch your stuff for you. It's awesome. So I have projects where we probably have a dozen patches, some for Drupal core, some for contributed modules. And when we go to update that module, I'll check in the composer.json, see if we have a patch, see if it's been committed. I taught a Composer class all day yesterday, and I had one guy in the class who said, I do that, but I don't even check composer.json. I just try and update, and if the patch doesn't apply, then I know I have to do something. which is fine as well. I'm a little more OCD, anal retentive, pick your adjective. But it's you know, it's a very cool way to do it. And it will, if you've ever been, if you've ever seen that you need a patch and kind of roll your eyes and go, oh crap, this is going to be a nightmare. This is awesome.
So just to verify, you said run composer install.
Yeah, so you basically require it, and then there's a little bit of syntax. I have it here in my notes. I'm just gonna, if I had time to do the demo, I would have. I'll zoom in, don't worry. So in the extras section, there's a new patches array. And so here I would be adding patching in the max length module. And you basically, the first part of it is you basically put a description. And normally, I normally just copy the issue title. And then this is the link on Drupal.org to the actual patch.
But more my question was install as opposed to having to just run a composer update.
To apply the patch, you just do an install.
Okay.
Just put that in there, composer install. What will happen is composer will actually reinstall max length in this case, and then apply the patch.
Or you can just do require Drupal max length too, if you just want to.
Yeah. Same, it's
Okay.
end result is the same. Oh man, we're done. All right, well, I'll show you one more slide and then we'll be done. Sorry, I thought I got to take out some of these examples. So this is actually my favorite because I think this is awesome. I told you a bunch about the scaffolding plugin, and I'll just show you the code again. But if you wanted to remove that README file, it's just that simple. You basically say, copy. This is the to, and this is the from. So copy to readme.txt false or nothing. So if you already have the readme, you have to delete it. But then add this, and from then on out, every time the scaffolding plugin runs, you won't get the readme anymore.
That's good if you have like a custom robot text and you don't want it.
Yeah, and you can either patch it, or you can append to it, or you can, or you can, like in your case, something completely replace. Yeah. All right, draw Drupal console. There we go. Okay, so be nice and contribute. All right, thank you very much.